Today's guest has created work that has attracted the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs grant, Award of Distinction and finalist, Art Kudos International Art Competition, Best in Show and Merit Creative Quarterly 10, and Boston University grant. Her drawings, paintings, sculptures, and jewelry have been exhibited in galleries all across the United States. Please welcome to Inside Art Head, the artist, Stephanie Inagaki. Greetings, everyone, and thanks for joining the Inside Art Head podcast. It's here we'll explore the inspiration, motivation, process, and fulfillment of creating art. I'm your host, Roni Zulu, bringing you inspirational stories from artists around the world. Stephanie, welcome to the show, and thanks for letting us get inside your art head.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Heck yeah. This is a very special show because you're quite a Renaissance woman. I don't think that I can cover all the art you do in one show. That'd be about 4 shows, but we're going to try to slam it all into one.
Okay.
Um, let's start with your two-dimensional work. Let's start with your drawings. Your drawings are more often than not done either with graphite or charcoal and void of color or no color at all. Can you tell us why that medium is very prevalent with you?
Um, I was thinking about this when I got your questions. In college, I had a very academic training, and
Mm-hmm.
so we all had to draw the crumpled paper and fabric and charcoal and do all the the boring.
Uh-huh.
Most people thought it's boring, but I'm like, oh, this is great. I had so much fun on like the technical aspect of that, and I was skilled in it. So I just that's where it started. And then as I progressed and went into grad school, where I was able to deal more on a conceptual level with my work, um, I started approaching more of like an art historical conversation with the pieces and also working through a lot of personal um, things that have happened in my life that took a while to sift through. And so I used that as like a launch pad basically to go black and white. But then, like, as life happens and having more opportunities as I meet more people, one of my best friends, Alan Amato, did a project called Temple of Art. And then it was a collaboration between his photography portraits of artists and then us having to collage or reinterpret or however, whatever we wanted to do with the self portraits. And so I basically took cuts of portraits he took of me and then like went to town and used color and collaging and like mixed media. So from there, probably like half my work is now color with the collaging, but still like black and white with the charcoal. Like the main figures are all still in charcoal. So that's like the progression of my medium
Awesome.
history.
Now, you mentioned in there, I caught that you said you were working through some stuff with your art. Do you think that art has that power to help people, immerse themselves in it to work through whatever they might be going through?
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. I am definitely way better expressing myself visually than through words. Like, everybody is always like, I hate writing artist statements, and that's like, I'm definitely one of those people too. I have to have
I
my
hear you on
friends who
that.
are really good writers. Yeah, like go, sift, like butcher it, and it's just like, oh, it's such a pain in the butt, but like you have to, and it does help. Like in the whole context of like being able to articulate what we're trying to say. But yeah, now I'm totally blanking on what you just
No,
said.
but that's cool. I think you're getting at a lot of what I even believe. It's one of those we're artists. Our pictures tell 1,000 words. And I
Mhm.
think we're a little bit better than that than trying to write it out all the time.
Right, right.
The one
And
thing
like,
I wanted to
your
ask you
oh, go ahead.
now, speaking of your work has what I would say a very obvious cultural basis to it. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So growing up with parents who are immigrants, like as a child, they did a lot of like cultural things for us, but then there's always this weird cultural straddling of like it's Japan at home, but then it's America outside, and then having to assimilate. And I grew up in a very like predominantly white, like middle upper class county in California, um, and just trying to like all kids are trying to find their little niche and like find their friends, and so
Hmm.
um, there basically was a point probably like junior high school where I was like basically rejecting my culture to like try to fit in more, like be more American, because we still do speak Japanese at home, and my parents, we didn't go to Japanese school, so like they were teaching us how to write and read, and and then more life shit happened.
Oh yeah.
um, yeah, there's been a lot of like poignant things that have happened in my life, and then like as I've gotten older, I've become more confident in myself and who I am, and then um, basically looking at my cultural background and being like, yeah, this is pretty fucking awesome. Like all the crazy mythology and folklore that I've been able to be inspired by. There's so many great stories to be told, and so um, then I started to integrate um, a lot of the Japanese yokai, like monsters, like into my work, since I had already been drawing a lot of animals that I view as familiars to me. So like foxes and crows and bats and things like that, because they definitely have their own folklore within Japanese culture. And then just from there I've been like fully embracing it. Also because I've been using like one of the color aspects of my work is I've been cutting out washi paper and like the flowers and like integrating that as like another layer.
Wow.
So yeah,
That's that's a lot,
intense.
but that's awesome. I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of your work, obviously, and I've always wondered if someone was to see your work who didn't know all the story about it, the imagery might be alluring, kind of haunting, and sometimes
Mhm.
disturbing. I guess that's just part of the folklore.
Yeah, it's there's definitely a lot of creepy folklore within Japanese culture, but also uh, being goth since like junior high school, that definitely is like a huge influence in that. But I also view like death isn't necessarily a bad thing. Um, for a very long time, I've seen life and death as being very symbiotic, and necessary for both things to exist. Because that probably stems from I've always loved animals, and so as a child, I always had like a ton of stuffed animals and always wanted animals, and so my parents were like, if you're gonna have pets, then like you have to take care of them. So then as a small child, I experienced like rabbits don't always live that long. So like I've had like
Yeah.
multiple rabbits die and then like, my family dog die, and like we've had to bury them. So being exposed to things like that at an early age, I think gave me like more respect for um, life and death and like in that regard, and but also seeing the beauty in it as well.
Well, I think that definitely comes across in your work, and I think a lot of people can learn from that. That fear of death is it's not a good thing, because it comes to us
No, and
all. But
like it's been so sanitized within our like American culture specifically because if you look back into the Victorian era, like people were heralded in their gorgeous like caskets, these glass caskets that are super embellished and they're, paraded down the street so everybody can see like the deceased, or they would take photos of the deceased like in these poses or like with the living, and it was definitely more exalted and like respected back then. But now with how sanitized and like separate the crazy industry is, that that there's just such a separation that a lot of people, I mean, by our ages now, like everybody, I feel like everybody's experienced some kind of death, whether if it's immediate or like within friends or friends of friends. And just so many people still have such a difficult time talking about it and dealing with it, and then it comes off more often than not as being really crass. So it's like
yeah,
don't say anything. If you're feeling uncomfortable, just don't say anything because you're probably gonna say something shitty to the
yeah,
person who's grieving. And yeah, I think like humans as a whole could do way better.
I think we
and
could,
and like yeah.
especially in that area of, well, first of all, accepting the inevitable and just realizing it's part of the cycle. So
Yeah.
I'm glad your work has that in there.
Yeah, thank
Another
you.
aspect of your work that I'm curious about, it's quite often that you employ yourself as the
Mhm.
subject in your work or either a character in your work. When you do that, can you tell me about it? Is it self portrait or is it you playing a character? Some of both? What's going on there?
Initially did really start off as being self-portraits. I was um the work I started with the self-portraiture in grad school had a lot to do with um like the male gaze and myself being a woman of color in this predominantly white male dominated, still is dominated within the art world. Doesn't matter which scene you're in. Um, I experienced the blue chip world going to fancy hoity toity art school for grad school, or even being in like a lowbrow scene here locally in Los Angeles. It's still very white male dominated. Um, and so initially it was more so that, but then more recently, like with the Japanese mythology and folklore influenced work, it's more of that, like, because it's Japanese, so I the easy subject, and I look Japanese, and then so then it's more like the storytelling part of that, and then as like a side note to that, I have definitely been criticized for only doing self portraits, but that those always sell. So that's like another thing for me to look. Of course, I'm going to do something that's going to sell because it's my career and this is my full-time job. Like as much as I like do enjoy drawing other people, statistically, those tend to like not sell as well as the ones with me in it. So I'm going to keep
That
doing
makes sense.
that.
I think the
Yeah.
collectors probably find it much more personal that you are a part of the art. It's like,
Yeah.
be the art, and it's like, well, they get that with you
Yeah.
when so I think that's actually pretty cool. Now, you're
And then
also a
I've
jewel.
fully yeah, and
Carry
I've
on.
fully embraced that, like with the you're segueing into the jewelry, because a lot of the product shots I take with any new line I make, I just insert myself because at one point I'm like, I am I am my own brand as well, so I might as
Hmm.
well just. And I also enjoy getting dressed up and like having friends do my makeup and hair and getting cool shots taken.
So
um,
I think that's
yeah,
awesome.
I'm.
you really throw yourself literally into all of your creative processes,
Mhm. Yeah.
and it's obvious, and I think that's cool. It's pretty obvious that you're actually living this art instead of just doing it because, well, you're all over it and in it and through it. I think that's awesome. I think that's how every artist would want to live, to just immerse themselves in art in the way that you have. Um,
Mhm. It is
let's go
fun.
back to the beginning a little bit, that everybody always wants to talk a little bit about the starving artist days. There was a time when this wasn't as lucrative as it is now. I think you do pretty well now, and your work is amazing. What was there a time where you questioned and said to yourself, Stephanie, maybe I should be a plumber or a doctor? Was there a time where self doubt hit and you were wondering, is this going to work?
I've always had a type of like grit and motivation where I've never questioned that. I've
Mm-hmm.
never questioned not doing art. It's more of like, holy shit, I need to have multiple side jobs in order to, or multiple side jobs and um, cutting back on how much groceries I'm buying to be able to manage. I mean, I've definitely been in like numerous desperate situations where I've had to like borrow money from friends to pay rent the next month, and things like that. And luckily, I have like a solid group of friends and family who've always been extremely supportive. Because like nobody can go through life just by themselves. Like
Yeah.
unless you're living on an island totally isolated with no electricity, like none of the comforts of, current technology. Like you there's always somebody like with you and helping you.
Mm.
So, but yeah, like I've always since I decided I wanted to go to school for this, like that's always been like my vision. Yeah, and of course, like with everything going on in the world right now, politically, environmentally, like everything, and seeing where all this is going, and I make luxury items, so I'm always the first to get cut with spending. I mean, yeah, I've honestly, even to this day, been like, if things get worse and I can't pay rent with selling my work, I'm gonna have to get a part-time job. I mean, that's still a reality, like in the horizon, if depending on what happens to our country and in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little scary now. Yeah. I hear you
It
being,
is.
selling luxury items and being the first to get cut. Yeah. That's being an
Yeah,
artist, isn't it? Now,
it
you
is.
mentioned, I like that you did mention support. And let's talk about family support. And I'll go so far to say is the traditional Japanese family and friends that I know and are friends of mine, if their little girl was this gothed out, all black, wearing, painting monsters kind of, Wednesday Adams in a Japanese body, they would kind of really wonder, how did your parents take you being not just different in Japanese culture, but really just different altogether?
Um, so luckily, as the years have gone by and with the poignant events we've had to go through as a family, they've become way more liberal. Like even my family, most of my family's still in Japan, and they've mentioned to my parents, they're like, "You guys are so much more liberal than than we." I mean, granted, they're like almost 10 years older than my parents are because they're like older siblings, but yeah, no, it was. because then I think I also benefited from the fact that my parents worked all day long, and growing up as a kid in the 80s, like we were all latchkey kids. And so basically they're just like, okay, be back by 6 o'clock. Nobody had cell phones. Um, and like we weren't rich enough to have pagers. And so we just like were left to our own devices, and we can go to Blockbuster or the warehouse and like buy and rent whatever music, movies that we wanted to. And like luckily, because I had an older brother, like he had a computer and the internet, and so we had like the whole dial-up internet to like look up any nefarious things that we wanted to, or um, we had MTV. So then we, grew up with Liquid Television with all the crazy animation, like Eon Flux and the Max, and
Oh
like,
God, I love
and
Neon Flux.
yeah, right, it's so good. And then junior high school was like the like when I turned goth was the trifecta of The Craft, The Crow, and then A Nightmare Before Christmas. And then my brother, who was into martial arts, but then like into D&D, um, he rented all like the horror, action, like martial arts movies. And so I got to watch them with him. And I think it was a combination. My parents were working so much and then like being tired, plus language barrier, that they're just like, okay, whatever. Like they didn't censor anything that we watched. Same with my best friend growing up too. When I'd spend the night at her house, I still remember watching The Shining with her, and we're like so scared. I think we're still in elementary school, or maybe junior high, and just being scared shitless watching all these like horror movies by ourselves. But then like
But all that
as
feeds into creativity, doesn't it?
it does. And then like as I got older, like into high school, that's when my mom was more like, "What are you doing? This is creepy. Like, why are you making skeletons?" I'm like, "You let me rent Night Before Christmas. I'm making Jack Skellington." And I'm like, "How are you not seeing the connection here?" And then but then in junior high school, like unfortunately, um partway through, my brother got diagnosed with leukemia, and so they were working full time, and basically like I didn't have parents, and I was like left to my own devices at that point. um but I've been so like independent and self-sufficient that like, and I was in honors classes, and like even though I looked like this, I was like always good in school. And then my mom was like way more strict with my brother, because she was like, "You're gonna be, you know, towing the family name and blah blah blah." So like she didn't let him be a historian like he wanted to. She's like, "You can do that as a hobby. Like you need to get a job to make money." And so he went to business school at USC. And then with me, I still remember her telling me, she's like, "You can do whatever you want, but if you don't get good grades, then you won't get scholarships and you're going to have to pay for all of it. But do whatever you want for your major because your husband's going to pay for everything." I'm like,
You're
like
like,
that's
not
not
even.
happening. I'm like, that's not happening. Um, and then like they definitely like were more socially conservative like in my 20s, but then as they saw me having my friends who are like in the same scene as me or that are burners, and then having different kinds of relationships, whether they're poly or swingers or drag queens or all these things that seem strange to them. Um, but then they meet them and they see that they're really, really good people, and they're my closest friends. Then they're like, oh, they're good people. Like they're not seeing them as like a strange anomaly, and have like over the years have become more accepting. I mean, like one of my part-time jobs that I took that I mentioned, I used to work at Stockroom, which is like a famous sex shop here in LA. And like they knew I was working there. So they weren't against it or anything, because they knew I needed to make money. Um, so, and then once, like with them, like once Trump got elected, because I used to watch Fox News like all the time
Mm, yeah.
between all the other channels and stuff too. But like once he came into power, they were really scared about losing because they've always been legal residents. So they got
Hmm.
really scared about losing their citizenship here, even though they've lived most of their lives here now and pay their taxes and do all the things. Um, so pretty much since then, they've become like way more liberal and way
So,
better.
and they
So and
get
then
you.
they see
They
that I
get your art.
yeah, yeah, and then they see that I'm succeeding and I've been able to make a living off of it. Because my mom was always like, you have a master's, like why aren't you teaching? I'm like, I didn't do this to become a teacher. So
You're like, I want to
so yeah,
create.
that's
Now
right.
there has to be
I
a
mean,
little.
if I was gonna,
There has to be just a little sense
oh,
of
go ahead.
pride when they see your work because it has such cultural meaning. Do they get that and go, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, they do, and they're sweet. They come to most of my openings, and like come
That's so
support, or
cool.
they come to yeah, and they come to Monsterpalooza on the weekends when I vend, and I mean half of it's to like people watch too, to like see everybody's like cool like makeup and costumes that they like enjoy going to. So then they've met a lot of my friends like through that as well because they come to my shows. And then they come and they like wear my jewelry or like my t-shirts, which is like super sweet. So yeah, yeah, no,
Speaking of your
yeah.
jewelry, let's jump in there a little bit. Like I said, you do so many things. Is jewelry? I'm. Is it like drawing? I'm not a jeweler, so I'm trying to get what is jewelry to you? Like I know you do drawings and you do paintings and stuff. Jewelry is now more three-dimensional. So what is that like as opposed to what do you get out of making jewelry that let's say you don't necessarily get out of just two-dimensional work?
So I got my both my BFA and MFA in sculpture, but I
Oh.
was working on like large scale sculpting um and then while I was in grad school, I found this woman. Her jewelry company is called Octopus Made Jewelry, and she would like these earrings she casts from real octopus tentacles. And so I apprenticed with her for the last year I was in grad school, and I had taken some other jewelry classes like here and there between college and some like local classes. But then I like really got into it after I apprenticed with her, and it doesn't quite get the itch of large scale sculpting, but I still get that um, itch relieved with like making smaller pieces, and because sometimes I have some friends who are amazing jewelers, but they mostly 3D render and then print their work,
Ah.
and I am so not a digital person. That like the most digital thing I do is like cleaning up my photos like after I take like product shots or cleaning up my scans for my drawings or you know making like little advertisements for sales or whatnot. But there's something different being able to see something in the round as opposed to um, something that's just two dimensional. And then like with the jewelry, um, like like this one for example, like I wear them, and I know my clients wear them as like talismans, as like protectors. Uh, so a lot of my larger pieces tend to be worn like that as well.
What do you do with a piece, whether it's 2D or 3D? Let's say you work on something and it just
Mm.
won't do what you tell it to do. Do you scrap it? Do you save it for later? Do you learn from it? What happens when a piece just won't behave?
Um, I tend not to throw anything out, so I'll save it and just like shove it in the bag. And then whether I'm needing new ideas or like even if it's just a sketch, like I'll go through my sketchbook and be like, oh yeah, like I'll go through old sketchbooks, be like, oh yeah, this thing I never made, and um, that happened with my latest piece of jewelry I carved, which is um, triple-headed crow skull, crows, and I was
Oh, wow.
like I don't really like this. I don't even remember when I drew it. It's been probably like 7 years ago. Um, but then I was like itching to sculpt something new, and then I looked at it again, like, oh yeah, this isn't so bad. Like I thought it was awful, and now I'm inspired by it. Um, so
And
more
you're an
more so
old
than
school
not, I have.
jewelry maker, right? You sculpt from wax.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
all hand carved wax first.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
It is.
That's so
It
cool.
is. Luckily, yeah, luckily with wax, if I mess up something, I can like heat up more wax and like add. Um, I'm always super impressed with people who work reductively solely, like marble carving or wood carving. Like I could never do that. That is an
I don't know.
insane skilled app. Yeah.
I bet you could.
Like a
Let's
lot
talk
of
about
a
another
lot of
aspect of. I'm going to jump into another of the many aspects of Stephanie. You're a stage performer as well.
I was, yeah.
I recently saw you on Instagram, something, there was a lot of pleather and leather and somebody walking around with two kind of spiked front end things. And I think you were smacking them in the head. I don't know what was going on, but it was very intriguing. Is that an extension of your creative side, or of your drawing, your sculpting, or is what is the stage? Why the stage?
Um, as much as I have stage fright, um, like one of my creative things I've done since probably started, well, I initially started off um, being classically trained in piano. So I did that for
Oh,
about 12 years, starting in sometime in elementary school, like up until probably like end of high school. But then end of elementary school, like fourth, fifth grade, I started taking dance classes, and then um, so it was hip hop jazz classes, and then once I hit high school, my friends and I went to Ren Fair one day for the first time, and we're like, these Middle Eastern dancers are really cool. And then I found uh, a local teacher, and then I'd been taking Middle Eastern dancing up until probably I've been taking classes in maybe like 6, 7 years now, maybe a little bit longer. But I've always enjoyed dancing, um, and there's something different about that kind of performance than making something that's just 2D or worn. So, um, and I don't know, Torture Garden's always fun. It's a bunch of people dressed in these amazing, crazy outfits, and
I think that's
um,
what I saw,
like
and it was pretty incredible.
yeah, and like I do appreciate that. I always get asked to be one of the models, even though I don't really consider myself a professional model. Like I some of my friends are always there too, modeling, and like I mean they've done it for a living. So I'm like, I just do it for fun on the side. Thanks for asking me. But it's, there's something different and fun about getting like totally remade, um, and becoming like a different character in that way. So it's fun.
Sounds like a lot of fun. But
Yeah, yeah.
let's jump off of fun and go to challenge. How do you challenge yourself as an artist? Do you still do that? Do you push yourself or allow yourself to be pushed in some way out of a comfort zone to get somewhere or do something artistically?
Um, I feel like that's for me a little bit more of like a long haul situation. Um, but more immediately, um, I feel like with the jewelry sculpting, I mean, it's technical, but that's my immediate challenges that keep coming up is how, as I'm sculpting and designing, I need to figure out how much of a pain in the ass is going to be to mold because a lot of my pieces are just these like crazy three-dimensional. It's also a boon because it's harder for people to copy me
Hmm.
because the molding is just so crazy complicated. Like some of the bigger cuffs I've made, it takes two people to open the mold, and
Wow.
the molds are huge like this. So, um, or the fact that like they're so heavy, like they take so much metal that it would not behoove like a Chinese company to like rip off my pieces.
Yeah.
Um, because my mentor has definitely been ripped off, and I see the ring that's ripped off like all the time on people, and um, it's disheartening to see because she is a amazing single mother living up in the Bay Area, you know, in both our situations, just like trying to make a living. And then I see like people be like, "Oh, I love your jewelry and I love your earrings. Like, look at this ring." I'm like, "Oh, I know. I can tell like even without you showing me like this that it's a ripoff because I made the original ones like when I was working for her." And
Oh,
then
wow.
yeah, so then I'll be like, "Hey, when you have more money, like please look her up and try to buy from her like if you can." Like I'm not going to be a dick about it,
Yeah.
but it's cuz
I think a lot of people don't realize what they take away from an artisan when
yeah.
they support a knockoff.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Or
yeah,
they could
that
have
is sad to
made
see.
the ring, so I'm not going to be like, "Why didn't you buy this $200 ring instead?"
Yeah. I
Or
mean,
their
I
kids.
get that.
Yeah, or their kids that come up to me and obviously they don't have a lot of money but they want to look cool. Like I get that. Like I was like that growing up. I have to buy stuff from thrift stores and like remake things to look cool. So, yeah. Hopefully as they get older and like they do remember what I say that they will purchase from the original artist instead. But
Stephanie, with
yeah, I
all
hope
the
that answered your
stuff you
question.
do. Oh, yes, you did. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'm loving where we're going with this. I have a question because you do so many things. Um,
Hmm.
what's downtime like, and how important is downtime? Is it something very active or is it something very still?
It's a little of both. I do when things aren't totally crazy. I do try to keep a schedule of like working out, and then if like the weather permits, because sometimes it is way too hot here to go hiking. But like I try to go on a regular schedule, like go hiking, and then like mix that up with like working out and doing yoga at home to like start my day off with. And then downtime, like in the evening, I tend to just watch cartoons or K dramas
Yeah, that's awesome.
because yeah, like K drama rom coms because they're just like they're so ridiculous and funny and yeah, a lot of it is on just like a it's they're so predictable, but I mean, I enjoy the stories regardless, and the acting is really good. So um, it's just something stupid and funny to watch. Um, like I haven't for the longest time I haven't watched anything like a series, like a long series that's serious because the world sucks right now.
Yeah, things are a little wacky right now.
And
Do
having
you
that love,
think? Oh yeah. Do you think when we get in phases, let's say, like we are in the world right now, where the world sucks just a little bit,
yeah.
do you think artists they mark time a little bit? Like, are you an artist that will paint, draw, sculpt something that has to do with what's going on today, or is that of no interest to you?
Um, in that way, I don't really touch like the political aspect of things. I feel um like being a representative of like women of color and like the more long vision of that, because
Hmm.
we still have issues of representation. Like in that way, I feel like I'm like politically inclined, but and also all the stuff happening right now, um, I don't necessarily feel like I have all the tools and knowledge to be able to like properly address. Um, I've definitely like been doing more like history diving because I mean there's just so much that like our school system doesn't teach us that I've
Hmm.
had to learn as an adult and research myself and like listen to history podcasts or like social political podcasts to be like, oh my god, this thing happened in Los Angeles and nobody talks about it, or even like on a local level, nobody talked about all the redlining that happened with the freeway systems being built and they were forcibly pushing out people of color and so that the freeways wouldn't go through white neighborhoods, things like that. Like nobody talked about that when we grew up here. So um, yeah, so currently like I haven't like touched on any of the like major
But as a whole,
current pop.
it just happens because of who you are and being present. So yeah, it
Yeah.
I can see how you don't need to pinpoint it. Just being present and just fighting the good fight by just doing you kind of
Mhm.
fits that bill.
Yeah.
So with that, what?
Do
Okay, go on.
and I do see that it's slowly changing like as I because I do a lot of vending locally,
Mm-hmm.
um and there's it's becoming a lot more inclusive, which is really great to see. Or just even I don't go to as many concerts anymore, but one that stood out that I went to earlier this year, um, this musician came in from New York and she's queer, and she even was like, this is amazing. Like it's run like the event was run by a goth alt Latino group, and everybody billed is a person of color and or queer, and they were like, I felt so welcomed being here, and they're an older artist too, and so it's like yes, like this feels great that like finally because the goth scene, whether it was here when I was growing up or when I went to school in Boston and San Francisco, was like still very very white um, back then, and then seeing that slowly change and like seeing more people like that even as attendees is really great to see. So that's like a good change that's happened.
So you enjoy vending, being at events and meeting people,
I do.
selling all your goods.
Yeah, yeah. As much of an introvert as I am,
Yeah.
I guess I'm more of like an extroverted introvert. It's always the rewarding thing about it is seeing people come back to my booth and they're wearing my jewelry, or they're like, I could only buy this little thing last time, but I like saved up to buy this bigger thing from you. Or they'll be like, that piece is like one of my favorites. It's like still hanging in my house, or they've like gifted my artwork and jewelry, and they tell me that the other person like still really loves it. So it's a way to like meet people face to face and to um, like build that like relationship with people, which is really sweet. And then sometimes that's turned into like really great friendships as well. So um,
Do
yeah,
you
as
take
as
commissions at all? Do you ever
I
take
do. I
commissions for
sometimes
jewelry? Or? Yeah.
Jewelry, not so much, because I tend to have people asking me to make things that aren't in my wheelhouse,
Okay.
or it's designs completely different, and that if if I could sculpt something that I can integrate and like sell within my own work, then I'm more likely to. But I've definitely done like one-offs occasionally. Like I've done like a few like wedding engagement rings, but it's still like in my style.
Yeah.
So yeah, but more not so much. But I'm also
But
grateful that like I can say no to things like that at this point.
and it's important, right, to be able to say no because I'm sure that some people might ask you to do something that's just either not in your wheelhouse or just not your style.
Yeah. Yeah, it's if it's not something I can do, I always recommend other friends that make amazing jewelry and have them. I don't know if they ever contact them maybe sometimes, but um, I usually try to like not leave them hanging.
Now, what about? I believe that everybody has a mission, whether they think they do or not. Is there something that you might be able to say is your mission? Is there such a thing?
Um, if anything, I probably would go back to what I mentioned about just being a representative as a woman of color, making darker work. I don't necessarily know if I'm like totally in the dark arts.
Yeah.
I've had this discussion with Chazar too on his podcast. Um, but yeah, I think, and also breaking the stereotype of being like the meek, submissive Japanese woman, because we're not a it's not a monolith. But
Right.
I even to this day, you would think that even people in Los Angeles like wouldn't talk like that, but they do. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I'm
so
glad you're
and
out there showing
luckily,
them what you got.
thanks. And luckily, like all my close girlfriends, they're they're all women of color, fucking amazing women. They're like pillars in my life, and they're all strong and badass. So there's a lot of us out there.
Well, it's important to have a good, strong group like that. Um,
Yeah, it is.
so, is there anything else that you want to throw in there before I close up today?
I don't think so.
Is there a part? Let me ask you this: Is there a part of? Is there an art part of you that we haven't seen? Are you doing something that we haven't seen, Stephanie? We see
uh,
you dance and we see you make jewelry, or are you, I don't know, are you out there making dragons in your backyard, or you have a pet cyclops or something we don't know about?
God, I wish.
You're like,
not
I'm not allowed to
not
talk
current.
about that.
Maybe in the future when I have my house in the mountains in Yamanashi, and because that is my dream, is to like, because there's so many um, cheap old houses in Japan. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the last couple times I've been going, I've been staying with my friends like deep in the mountains, like out like around where Mount Fuji is, and it's just like
Mm-hmm.
it's such a magical place. And the first time I went there, I had never felt like a place felt like home, like deep within my body and soul. And I
Wow.
felt like crying like the first time I went, just like every day I was there, because it's so beautiful and gorgeous. And it looks like if you've seen Miyazaki's films and like how he illustrates what Japan's countryside looks like in the mountains and the forest, like it's exactly like that. Like it's
Wow.
so magical. Um, but yeah, like my dream goal is to be old and retired in the mountains there and be the weird creepy witchy lady with like all the animals deep in the mountains making art.
Well, then when that happens, I'm sure I'll come by for a cup of coffee and check in on you.
Yes, definitely come visit. You would love it too. It's such a great. All the people are so nice, and like the food's amazing. It's inexpensive once you get there. Like, oh, it's so good.
I'm sure you'll still be creating something.
Yes, yes, always.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really enjoyed catching up with you and sharing with our viewers and listeners.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And to our viewers and listeners, if you've enjoyed this interview with Stephanie Inagaki, please check out some of our other interviews that I'm sure you're going to love. And before we check out, Stephanie, can you tell our viewers and listeners where they can find you online?
I have two websites. One for my art is just at stephanieinagaki.com, and my jewelry is miyudecay.com. And I'm also on Instagram as Stephanie Inagaki and TikTok as well.
Excellent. Stephanie, thank you so much. And to everybody else out there, until next time, be well.